Welcome to the Patron Saints of Pop Culture podcast. I'm Miguel Covarrubias.
And I'm Kathy Covarrubias. And today, let's talk about Hulu's 2019's Little Monsters.
Thank you so much for listening. And if this is your first time listening to our podcast, don't forget to review and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform.
Also, too, we just wanted to give a content warning for this spooky episode. There's going to be some mild cursing, so if you would rather not listen to that, this might be an episode for you to skip.
Today we are going to be talking about the Zombification of Society.
Then we'll talk about how you need to grow the fuck up.
And then we'll give you the saints of the show.
And then finally, we'll give you our contact information. So if you'd like to give us any feedback or have any additional thoughts about this episode or Little Monsters itself, please feel free to reach out.
So now let us give you our summary review. And don't forget, spoiler alert for the entire movie, because we were going to be talking about, well, actually, I'm not going to be talking about the movie a whole lot, except for at the end of what I have to talk about. So, let's see. Summary of this movie. Dave is a deadbeat person, and on a class trip for his nephew's class, runs into some zombies, along with the teacher of his nephew that he's trying to woo. Hilarity and romance ensue.
Sure, that works. All right, my turn. So, as you said, Dave is a deadbeat. He is living off of his sister, pretty much. He sees his nephew's teacher is like, oh my gosh, she is so pretty. I want to get with that. So then he's like, I will volunteer for this field trip. They go on the field trip. There's a zombie outbreak, and then the two of them try to make sure that the kids don't die, and then people do die, but do the kids? I won't spoil it for you. Well, we already said spoilers. Yeah, the kids don't die. They save the kids.
Yes.
And then they get together and sing songs.
Taylor Swift, to be exact.
Mm-hmm, yep.
I enjoyed the movie. I thought it was a lot of fun. It really broke up our scary movie session here for this Halloween season.
It definitely still falls in that category, though, because
yes, zombies. Even though zombies are kind of played out, but I'll talk about that here in just a minute. I enjoyed it, and as I was doing research for the episode today, I think that it might be deeper than I originally thought. Either that or it's not. So
I think what you're going to talk about, because I already know, folks, because we talk about this ahead of time. I think the thing you're going to talk about is more of the zombie genre in general, but I don't think necessarily that the writers or producers of this movie had that in mind. They just thought, hey, zombies is a thing that people like, and Zombieland did really well. Why don't we make a funny zombie movie? And then they did.
Yeah, you never know, though. The screenwriter could have had deeper intentions.
This doesn't seem like a very deep movie to me, but I guess that's part of my review. Should I just move along into my review?
Yeah,
okay.
Go for it.
This doesn't seem like a very deep movie to me.
Okay.
It was definitely fun. There wasn't a lot of jump scares. I wouldn't even say it was that suspenseful, really. There wasn't too many times when I was like, oh my gosh, like, blah, blah, blah. I kind of always thought that the kids were going to be okay, because it's very rare that a movie like this, with this type of, tone, would kill off a kid that we've been introduced to.
True. Even the kids that are not ideally the best kids in the entire class. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then the kids that are zombies, we don't see them become zombies, and we don't have any connection to them.
No.
So it doesn't. They don't.
Most of them are teenagers anyway.
There's whole classes there too. Remember?
Yeah, I may just be misremembering things.
So all in all, I did enjoy it. It was a lot of fun, but I wouldn't put too much. It wasn't that very deep. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So I want to argue that a little bit, only because I kind of went into the symbolism of zombies today as far as research into this movie. I was finding a little difficult time trying to find a topic that was outside of something that I normally don't talk about for these things. Primarily because you decided that you were going to talk about that topic a little bit more than I did. So I really spent a lot of time kind of researching the symbology of zombies, and one of the biggest helps for me was an article from Vox, which, as we talked about last week, they do that Explained series on Netflix. They have an article about zombies from the start of the mythos to Walking Dead. And this was published in 2016, so it wasn't necessarily up on some of the more modern takes on the zombie genre, but it does have some of the more...
Well, it has the more popular ones, for sure.
Some of the more popular ones, correct. Except for Zombieland 2, which just came out, which we haven't seen yet.
Well, of course it wouldn't. It came out in 2016.
Exactly.
Okay.
Just reminding people that one just came out, as well as this one. It just came out. So I want to remind you really quickly, zombie is a form of Haitian belief. This is kind of coming out of that voodoo religion that came from the Western African spirituality that was transplanted into the Haitian islands from the French slaves that were brought over. This stemmed from the 17th century in Haiti, where the slaves kind of stood up for themselves, kind of had their own rebellion. It was around the same time as the American battle for independence, the Revolutionary War. And this is kind of seen where we're here in the Western world. We're going to, kind of tear off this slave kind of idea and get away from this idea of having no agency. So there was this idea for those who were there in the land and working in the land that you could kind of, using the voodoo that they had, were able to take these people who were not quite dead, not quite alive, and use them as their slaves that had no agency. This was kind of an idea that was kind of giving life to those slaves there to say, no, this is not a life for us. We're not zombies. We're not going to be here for the French who are all the way over there and doing their bidding. No, let's be our own people here. So this kind of then evolved into this idea of the mythological zombie, because one white guy decided to go down there and document the magic of voodoo, and he was shown these zombies, I'm doing air quotes here, and he wrote about it in this book, and he talked about how there were these people in the field working, and they had no life in their eyes, that their eyes were worse than a dead man's eyes, that they just kind of stared endlessly, and they worked like brutes and didn't really complain or anything else like this, that they were the perfect slave.
So basically, just like almost any other white guy in history, they took something and made it more dramatized than it really was.
Exactly. Well, he wanted to sell books. And this came to the Americas, and this idea of the zombie was much more of this creature thing to be afraid of. It was more of that idea of slaves rising up and taking over the culture. So zombies became a very racist thing in pop culture. And in fact, you can see this from the very first zombie film, which was in 1932, called, now get this, White Zombie. Yes, it is White Zombie. It is two American tourists going to Haiti, and one guy falls in love with the woman tourist. They're on their honeymoon or something like this, and he decides to turn them both into zombies. They get out of it somehow. But it is a very kind of racist concept. This is the concept of zombies that American pop culture had up until Well, the Romero era. This is what I'm going to call the Romero era. It was 1968. George Romero really took the idea and flipped it on its head. He started to use the zombie film as a more pointed, political, and racist, a symbol to point out the politics and the racism and the violence that was inherent in America. This was very much seen in his 1968 epic, The Dawn of the Dead. I believe it's Night of the Living Dead. That's it. And then his next film, which was Dawn of the Dead, which was in 1978, 10 years after the fact that he followed that up with another zombie film. That's the one that people are much more familiar with, where people are involved, where people are in the mall, and it was remade in the early 2000s, late 90s. But it was this idea of commercialism and the concept of American ideals that were turning people, in a sense, into zombies. That it wasn't the culture from West Africa. It wasn't these other things that people had used as this idea of zombies, of something to be afraid of. It's foreigner things that people have been used for well over a century at this point, almost 2 centuries, that people have been using zombies as a way to be like, we should fear the foreigner. We should fear those things that are foreign to us. So George Romero uses those things that are more familiar to the American people to be the concept that we should be fearing. We should be fearing these status quo ideas. Now, George Romero's ideas were then kind of built upon with the whole Contagion era of the zombie movie after that. Moving from the 1980s, late 1970s to 80s and 90s and early aughts, we kind of have this idea of the zombie, of this contagion idea, that it's going to be contagious, something's going to get out. And, we had a lot of those contagion movies that came out during this time. We had Outbreak, which, granted, was not that scientifically accurate. But we had a lot of these contagion ideas, which were kind of taking that back to the idea that, foreigners are dirty, that all of these diseases are going to originate in somewhere else and going to come back into this country. So we started to get back into that racist idea of zombies. And then we get into this last era of the zombie symbol in America, which is the apocalypse era. Now, the apocalypse era is much more about the fear of losing agency. And the people who are most afraid of losing agency are those who have been in power in the country for almost 2 centuries, for over 2 centuries. And that is the...
Build-A-Bear.
No, not Bilderberg. Or the lizard people.
Oh.
It's mainly...
The Illuminati.
It's mainly the white supremacist people in the country because, people who held power were not the minorities. They were not the quote-unquote foreigners. And so those ideas of people coming in from other places was seen as dirty, was seen as something to be feared. And so that built upon this new idea of the apocalypse and breaking people off into their tribes. So they used that idea of the status quo is scary. Yeah, but the status quo is letting foreigners in and changing our way of life. So we need to tribe up with those other people that also do the way of life just like us. And that's how we survive. So it built upon this more right-wing conservative idea, and you can see this in The Walking Dead. And in fact, as I'm doing this research, I started to feel extremely guilty about Walking Dead and not realizing how right-winged and conservative and kind of racist the whole concept of The Walking Dead really is.
Seeing that they're based in, it's supposed to be taking place in Georgia, and the majority of the people who are alive are white?
Yeah. And I mean, granted, that just is Hollywood casting.
Yeah, but let's try to at least make it somewhat realistic.
Yeah. And this is the thing about Little Monsters is while I was doing this research is that I was really finding that zombies symbolize the fear, the grappling with the fear of losing agency. So in this movie, who is losing the most agency? And, well, obviously Australians, you kind of those big Australian symbols in the movie. You've got the big Australian flag. You have the sheep, and you have the farm, which are very much the Australian way of life. But right next door is an American testing facility. So this is where I feel like the movie did get a little bit deeper, is that I started to think about it, and I'm like, well, then that would mean the idea of this movie was that the Americans are causing the apocalypse in this instance through their racism, through their love of guns and weapons and violence, and the fact that if zombies did actually happen, then yeah, they're going to test them and going to, of course, put them in a place where, they can't even get to America very easily.
My thought is, though, there's very much more remote places in Australia.
Oh, yeah.
To have it.
Oh, yeah.
Why did I have to put it next to a farm?
The middle of the desert, for instance. Having been to Australia, there's people are pretty much only congregated around the coast. You can go inland and there's nobody there.
Well, the Australian outback, they even caution Australians from, unless you actually know it and really know what you where you're at all times and are very familiar with it, they don't want just people who've never been there before just to wander the desert, because they know you're going to get lost and die. Mm-hmm. And I also learned that from some murder podcasts.
Well, and the thing is that the reason why I feel this way, and I'm granted that this may not have been intended by the filmmakers, it may not have been intended by the screenwriter, but when I'm thinking about it, the more that I delve into it, the more that I pick it apart, I'm starting to think, yeah, the way that they portrayed Americans, well, basically as violence-loving, just idiots. That, and quite frankly, I'm pretty sure that's the way the world has seen us since 2016.
We just kind of, left our allies totally defenseless. So, yeah, I'm pretty sure that's how most of the world views us.
So, yeah, and really, I feel like this is why I feel it's a little bit deeper than we originally thought. So, if this were to happen, how do you see America's inherited racism and violence-loving as infecting the world?
Trump.
Well, how does Trump infect the world?
Well, I mean, we already had a bad reputation to begin with. There were certain countries where we had better reputation as others, but we've always been seen, especially after World War II, as the country that's constantly sticking their nose into other people's business, but not for good reasons.
Well,
mostly for bad
Korea
stuff.
And Vietnam specifically.
Yep. And we can also argue, too, that the current war that we're in right now, that, too, we were given an excuse to go to war with 9/11, and then we kind of used it to our advantage, for oil and stuff.
Yeah. I mean, even the main American, which, is seen as this, Josh Gad as Teddy McGiggle, honestly, extremely creepy. I'm like, yeah, Josh Gad, you're also the snowman in Frozen.
Yeah, it was very weird to hear his voice. But anyway, but yeah, he's definitely selfish, pushy, naive, just all bad stuff.
Well, and his was the primary example of zombies in pop culture in America, because when things went wrong, he was like, "Oh well, we're all just gonna die. Oh well."
Yep. Well,
I'm gonna look out for myself, and that's it. It was an individualism kind of thing, whereas the Australians were like, "Okay, let's group together. Let's work together to take care of the kids." And so,
Yeah. Well, not all the Australians, just the teacher and
just the teacher and Dave.
And Dave. Yep. Just to kind of wrap it up, I would say that Teddy is what a lot of people a lot of other countries around the world view Americans as. Like, we have a very bad reputation in terms of tourists. Mm-hmm. We have a bad reputation in terms of welcoming other people from other places into our country, whether they be here just for a short visit, like as tourists themselves, or people who are looking for a new home. So, I mean, he's just a downright douchebag, but I'm not going to argue that they're wrong, because that's kind of how most of us are.
So, how do we cancel the apocalypse, to borrow from another apocalyptic movie?
Well, the only way to do that is to learn from our mistakes, and we are a very stubborn nation. The only way that I'm going to have some semblance of hope is if we either get the orange fuzzball out of the office soon through impeachment, or we get him out of office by voting him out. So we'll see what happens. But those are the two things that will allow me to feel good about the country again. Because right now it's just not in my heart to give out the feels for America.
Well, thank you so much for allowing me to go down the zombie rabbit hole here. I hope that we do have some more films that kind of have something a little bit better to say about using zombies rather than just the classic racist and violent trope that humanity is to be feared. Yes, I get it. Humanity is to be feared. But we've got much better things.
Well, you can also say Shaun of the Dead has a different way of using the zombies, which is surprised that you didn't bring up, because their theme was more about how we are, us as all of society, are becoming our own zombies through consumerism. Yeah.
He pulled upon George Romero very well, and I think that was good, as well as... Warm Bodies, another Zom-Rom-Com that is out there that, was that love can bring us back from being zombies, that we can learn to be humans again.
Yep.
That we don't just stay zombies.
I forgot about that movie.
We own it.
I know we do, but every time I see it in our queue, I'm like, oh yeah, we own that movie. It's just one of those movies, Mm-hmm. All right, so I guess it's my turn.
Yes.
Okay. So, obviously, I'm going to be the part of the episode where I'm going to be cursing, because it's the title of my segment called Grow the Fuck Up. And there's two people who really need to grow the fuck up in this in this movie. That would be Teddy and Dave, unsurprisingly to everybody. Mm-hmm. So, I'm going to counter Miguel's usual argument. So, Miguel usually comes on when he talks about millennials, saying how we're not given the option to grow up a lot of the times. And I'm going to argue that there is a subset of millennials that have given us this bad reputation, and they totally do it on purpose, and they do feel entitled to certain things and certain privileges.
Well, yeah, there's a lot of us who grew up with helicopter parents.
Well, I don't even think he had helicopter parents. I mean, helicopter parents is more of a, eventually, you want to let them go. Yeah. But there's another group of parents who just didn't want their kids to have hurt feelings, period, at all. So that caused a lot of stunted growth in their personality and maturity. So with Dave and his sister, you can definitely see two sides of the millennial coin. So Dave's sister, she's a single mom. She is working. She is doing everything that she needs to do as an adult. And definitely is probably having some other struggles that we don't really see because we haven't given a chance to actually view her character that much. Now, with Dave, he is self-centered. Dave has ideas of who Dave should be, and he's going to keep that. Everybody else knows that Dave's band is never going to get back together, but yet he is still holding on to that. He's like the guy in the 90s who would not shut up about the touchdown that he was responsible for his high school football team that won them the championship.
Uncle Rico.
Basically, yeah. He's like the music version of that. Like he just won't let it go. It is still a dream of his. The only way he's making money from what I can tell is just playing by himself in the subway, which, not gonna lie, there are some performers who do that very well and can make, I wouldn't say riches, but they can definitely add to their income.
Well, they do well for themselves. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. But Dave is not one of those people. He's not putting any extra effort into his craft. He basically thinks that he's peaked, and that's also another dangerous thing too. When people think that they have reached their top performance, that is not a good sign. That usually means that they're not doing as well as they think they are. So it's kind of hard to think about, but I know this is going to be very gendered boy, girl, brother, sister stereotype kind of stuff going on. But a lot of the times when you have siblings that are the opposite gender, the more female presenting ones tend to have more responsibilities thrust upon them. They tend to be the people who are helping doing the cooking and the cleaning and maintaining the house. Whereas the male presenting counterparts tend to have a little bit more freedom in terms of their time. They're not given as many chores, or if they do have chores, they're allowed to be a little slack in them, given a little extra time, or they're actually not seen as being able to do the chores as well as the other siblings. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I mean, I did not come from a two-gender, sibling household, so this is definitely stuff that I am told about from anecdotal evidence that other people have brought to me. So would you say that that's something that you saw in your household growing up? Kind of, sort of?
I wouldn't say completely. I think probably because I'm a little bit more sensitive, which is a very much more feminine trait according to society. And so there were a lot of things that, were probably much more masculine that I was not pushed into to say, you need to be doing this. Or
I'm talking about the difference between household chores from your sister to you. Did she have more chores than you or anything like that? No? Would you say that the chores that she was given, she was more scrutinized about than you?
Probably. But that's only because my parents tended to pay more attention to her than either of the other kids.
Gotcha. I hear you. Well, I do think that this has to fall onto some kind of parent's fault in terms of how Dave and his sister turned out. Because they did come from the same household. They had the same parents. So obviously there was some kind of treatment difference between the two, which is normal between siblings. I mean, I'm not saying people shouldn't do that because it's just going to happen naturally. And one of the things that I have noticed in terms of real life people who are Daves in our lives is that the families and the parents tend to allow the behavior that Dave has to continue.
Yeah.
We all know that guy from high school who still has dreams of making it big in music, who lives in his parents' basement, doesn't contribute anything to rent or any other, anything else in terms of the household, but yet his parents, don't force him to get a job, or, they'll tell him, you got to get a job, but they don't do anything about it. They still let him stay in the house. And after a certain point in time, you can, tell them over and over again, we're going to kick you out of the house. But if you don't end up kicking them out of the house, they're going to realize you're never going to do it. So they're not going to listen, So do you know anybody who's a real life Dave?
Yes, but I am going to decline from naming names.
Well, of course, I'm not going to ask you to name names. Yeah. But do you also see the pattern of kind of the parents being enablers in terms of that behavior?
Oh, and I think that's the problem with being a parent is that you're your default mode is almost to be enabling.
I hope not. I don't want to enable. I'm like the exact opposite. I'm like, no, Peter, you're going to pull up your pants. I'm not going to pull up your pants.
Okay.
But then again, that also has to deal with, like, we grew up very differently. Like, I was always, myself as a kid was very independent, but my parents also encouraged me to be very independent. So, yeah, you know, growing up, different strokes.
All right.
And then, hopefully, something happens like it did to Dave, and there's going to be some bad circumstances that kind of force you to grow up, force you to reevaluate your life and think, I can't continue to do this or else I'm going to die on the streets and be lonely. So I got to change something. So in Dave's circumstance, obviously it was zombies.
Well, and the breakup.
True, yeah. Well, the breakup was kind of sort of the catalyst thing, but it still didn't cause him to change his ways.
Yeah.
Because he was still lusting after Miss Caroline for the wrong reasons.
Yeah. It was kind of the rebound relationship that he was going for.
Yes, exactly. And let's be honest, if it weren't for the zombies and like this incident, she would never have like had any any feelings towards him. Which, by the way, relationships who go through some kind of traumatic event like that at the start of the relationship most likely are not going to last that long.
That's a quote from Speed.
Is it?
Yes.
Oh, well, it's also a statistic that I actually looked up for this episode. I can't remember what the actual percentage is, but it's true.
Okay.
Yep. And then...
Which is funny, because Keanu Reeves was not in Speed 2. This time it's on water.
Because it's a boat.
Yep.
A real-life example of this happening would be a death of a family member. Now, the thing that I can't help but think about with people, real-life people like Dave, is what are their plans when their parents die? There's no one else that's going to be there to help take care of them, and they haven't done anything with their life to try to earn some kind of like substantial income. So what are they going to do? Just be like parasites on other family members until they die? Because that's at this point in time, that's what Dave was pretty much planning, from what I gather.
I mean, it can be the case.
Yeah, unfortunately. Well, that, of course, would leave you totally unprepared for, like, modern-day adulting, as we can see with Dave. And then also, too, when you are left in that circumstance where the family member who is taking care of you suddenly passes away or, like, says they're not going to do it anymore, you're left floundering. And you're doing these mistakes that you should have done at a much earlier age where you're given a little bit more forgiveness. When you are creating adult mistakes later on in life that you should have made earlier, you're not given as much forgiveness and you're just kind of seen as a jerk, you know? So that's another bad thing about that. Also, too, I've also seen it to where they will then go from like family member to family member trying to get them to let them live there and live off of their own income. You know what I mean? Which is also not a good thing. And ultimately, they just can't handle the responsibility, and it just all falls apart. So, have you experienced a bad circumstance to make you grow the fuck up?
Yes, several times, and I think it's what we talked about with our Westworld episodes, where consciousness kind of develops through suffering sometimes. Mm-hmm. And I think that we're not conscious of how underdeveloped we are, how arrested in our development we are until we're actually forced to take a good hard look at ourselves.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think I had some of those circumstances too to make myself grow up. I also too had some of those experiences a little bit earlier in life than most people do, depending on what the scenario was. So I think that that's one of the reasons why when I was younger, a lot of people assumed that I was actually older because I was able to develop my maturity level a little bit faster because of those circumstances.
All right.
Yeah, that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Well, let us give our Saints of Show then. For this one, I'm going to pick Dave's sister. I really feel that
Who's
her
either named Sarah or Tess, but we're not
Sarah
sure
Tess,
which one.
yes.
We looked it up. We couldn't find it.
And the reason being that she takes in her brother, and she knows that he's not very contributing at all. She, kind of hints at it, but she's not going to be like, get out. Mm-hmm. Well, she basically almost does at one point, but especially after his late night, hey, I'm going to go win my girlfriend back with my nephew.
Oh, God, yeah. I totally forgot that was a scene. Ah! Sorry, I'm just remembering it.
But she still gives him a chance that, and he kind of delivers. And when he does deliver, she does praise him for that. She doesn't, hold his past against him.
Yeah, that's true. Well, because, keeping a kid alive in a zombie apocalypse, it's kind of a big deal. Mm-hmm. Talking about keeping a kid alive in a zombie apocalypse, I am going to bless the children. Yep, I know that seems kind of counterproductive because, they were kind of the cause of a lot of the stuff in the first place. Not the cause, but they were definitely a hindrance in terms of their survival, for sure. I'm going to give them the sainthood because, one, all of her class managed to survive, which is kind of a big deal. And then also, two, there are some circumstances when you have to give up a little bit of your power in order to have somebody in leadership who is better equipped. Mm-hmm. And so the kids do, they look at her and they're like, Miss Caroline is here to take care of us. She knows what's best. I'm going to listen to her because we trust her. And I think as adults, that's really hard for us to do, especially American adults, but it's almost sometimes necessary. Sometimes we do have to just say, hey, I need somebody to kind of direct this project for me, or I need somebody to kind of give me a little bit of direction, aka getting a therapist, so then I can, survive life.
Yeah.
So thanks to the kids for giving me that deep thought.
So what do you think? Was this movie deep or was it not? Let us know if you have any other things that you would like to discuss, like zombies or about growing the fuck up. Please let us know, and this is how you can get a hold of us.
So you can reach us primarily at Instagram, but also at Facebook at Patron Saints of Pop Culture. We are also on Twitter at The Honest Faith. And then you can also reach us at our website at patronsaintsofpopculture.org.
All right. And this is going to be the almost penultimate episode of our podcast for season 3. So we are going to be taking a break for November and December for the holidays. If you enjoy our take on some movies, we do have some back episodes on Christmas classics. You can always go back and listen to those.
Oh, we have a lot. We can always repost them too, so make things a little bit easier for you guys to find. We might do that.
Yeah. So we may even, if we get bored, do another one.
A surprise Christmas episode.
Episode.
It's a Christmas miracle.
So with all of that being said, we invite you to come and join the conversation.
Bye.
Face.